Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Makdisi Street podcast. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different than the last few months, and talk about go back. So we had a previous episode to talk about football and sports politics on the question of Palestine, and we're very happy to have with us today Bassil Mikdadi, who is the creator of Football Palestine. And he's an international football pundit who writes about the intersectionality of football. His work as a journalist has been featured in the BBC, the Totally Football podcast, the New Arab, the Guardian, and many other kind of venues. And you can follow him, and I highly encourage you to follow him on his Twitter handle, which is at Football Palestine, FUTBOL Palestine. That's one word. And we're really happy to have you, Bassil, here to talk with us about the situation of football in Palestine, and really what we should kind of mention at the outset, and something we'll talk about towards the end, is that this is really kind of marking the fact that the Palestine football national team is about to play its final World Cup, or potentially its final World Cup qualifying match. That would be quite decisive. So we're going to be talking about that. But in general, Bassil, I'd like to start just by asking you what the Palestine football situation is in light of the genocide in Gaza. So, what is going on as far as you can see? How many Palestinian football players, staff, etc., how many have been killed in this genocide? What has the impact been in general?
It's been devastating. At the same time, there's a really weird juxtaposition because, as you mentioned, Palestine plays its perhaps the biggest match of its footballing history tomorrow, if they win, with the chance to be 2 games away from the World Cup finals in North America next summer. So you have that, meaning that they've had a lot of success on the pitch, juxtaposed with the fact that just like any other piece of the society has been heavily impacted by the genocide. People have died. At last count, it was something like 700 athletes, most of whom are footballers. And it's been just this broad subsection of Palestinian football in society. So you have administrators, referees, players, youth players, former players, players that are well known, players that are not so well known, coaches as well. So, I think the one thing we've learned over the past 20 months is that this genocide impacts everyone. There's no protected class. Children aren't protected, doctors aren't protected, women and children aren't protected. So, of course, footballers at the end of the day as well aren't going to be protected. And perhaps the biggest impact is since kind of the second Intifada, there's been consistent football played both in Gaza and the West Bank, meaning that they start the league season and they finish the league season. And then since October 7th, 2023, they have not played a league game. There's been absolutely no league football, which has thrown people into dire straits, people who depend on the game into dire straits. Those who could found employment elsewhere. Many, many Palestinian players playing in Libya, some playing in Qatar. All of those players were playing locally previously. Others have had to leave the sport. So perhaps we aren't seeing the impact of that right now, but 4 or 5 years down the line, you will feel the impact of, we didn't have a league season, we lost this generation, people left football, or people never even started a professional path because it didn't exist anymore. So, I guess the one thing we can say is there's at least a little bit of a silver lining, a little bit of good news in this just horrible period where all you hear is about death and destruction and some really, really brutal and gruesome stories. So I suppose we'll try our best to focus on the positive.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, and I think we need to remind ourselves that football, for many, is not just. I mean, obviously, there's the enjoyment of the game, there's the sport, there's the fact that most people, enjoy watching it, and it's a kind of distraction to watch football, to watch different kind of sports games. But it's also a job for many, right? As you said, it's a source of income. So a lot of people that have been unable to kind of continue this, having a source of income, is also something worth kind of thinking about. But I wanted to ask you more about the kind of pre-October 7th as well. What does it mean exactly to have a Palestine I think I saw an interview where you were talking to somebody, and I can't remember which one of these podcasts, but you were or maybe you were responding to somebody saying that there is no, that Palestine, there is no nation, and that they're kind of plucky kind of outsiders, but there is no real Palestine nation. What does it mean to be a Palestine football team that's dispersed across, even pre-October 7, that was dispersed across Gaza, the West Bank, inside 48, outside 48? Who constitutes this Palestine football team? Who can play?
Yeah, so I took objection to somebody saying that it's a national team without a nation, and my response was, we don't have a state. We are very much a nation, and any, I think, basic reading of history or of the present day reality shows that we are very much a nation. To answer your question, I think that the national team is the perfect embodiment of Palestinian society, because what you have in the national team is you have a unified Palestine without any imagined borders. There are players who are from Gaza. There are players from the West Bank. There are players who are from Jerusalem. There are players who are from different cities inside the Green Line, Haifa, Shafar Amir, Kfir Qasim, Majd Krum, to just name a few off the top of my head. You also have a decent amount of players that have come from the diaspora, something like the 250, 260 players that have represented Palestine since they got FIFA affiliation in 1998. About 25% of them have come from the diaspora abroad. That's the Arab world. That's also places that you wouldn't even think that there are Palestinians. Chile, Argentina, the United States. We've had players who come from Slovenia, even Spain, you name it. So it's a perfect embodiment of what it means to be Palestinian, because unfortunately, because of our history, half of us don't live in Palestine and really don't have a possibility of going back. And the national team is able, I think, to fuse together the society that is still in historic Palestine, as well as the members of the diaspora that are on the outside, to play for everyone, to play for all Palestinians, Palestinians who live in Palestine and Palestinians that live outside of Palestine, and to deliver a message. Because in football, everyone plays by the same rules. You adhere to whatever the ref says, and international recognition of Palestine is limited. But in a footballing sense, Palestine, the national team, is just like any other national team in the world. It's just like Brazil or England or France or whomever you might think of. Palestine has all the same rights, plays in all the same tournaments. And that really, I think, gives a glimpse into our past and also a glimpse into our potential future as well.
So, Bassil, on that point, can you just elaborate a little bit about how it is, two questions, how it is that Palestinians inside 48, how do they play for a national team of Palestine? How are they allowed, in other words? What are the logistics? And also, what is Gaza like playing in Gaza before October 7th, to follow Karim's question? How many fields were there? How many teams are there, as opposed to do they play against teams? How would they play against teams in the West Bank or others? Or is each league does this mirror the Palestinian situation, as in each place is fragmented and they play only amongst each other at the local club level, as opposed to at the national level?
Yeah, a fantastic question. Let me kind of begin with the second part of that question about Gaza, and then maybe just for the audience, because I think there are some people out there that might not follow football so closely. So when we talk about local leagues, we're talking about teams within one country playing against each other. When we're talking about the national team, we're talking international competition, basically a collection of players that play either in the local league or Palestinians that might have a club abroad and play abroad. They all come together once every couple of months and play in national competitions to qualify for the Asian Cup, or in this case, in these past couple of months, the World Cup. To answer your question about Gaza, so Gaza, it's a very special place because it is the hotbed of Palestinian football. They've produced some amazing players. Arguably, some of the greatest players ever to play for Palestine are players who are from the Strip or born in the Strip. And the situation before was difficult because you're talking about all the clubs would face all the same problems that society would face. So yeah, if you were a footballer in Gaza, you might be able to earn a meager living, but it wasn't all that much. The blockade would affect you if you need to get materials, your football boots, your shin pads, anything like that, anything you would need, bowls to run a football club. You're at the mercy of those who control the borders, which are the Israelis. So you have all these obstacles. As far as league play is concerned, it did end up being piecemeal. So you had a Gaza league that played amongst itself, and then you had a West Bank league, and they sort of went through many different iterations. But the latest iteration was you have 12 teams in Gaza that play amongst themselves, 12 teams in the West Bank that play amongst themselves. And then there were second divisions in each respective territory. And what the Palestinian Football Association attempted to do to kind of crown a champion was to get the champion of Gaza and the champion of the West Bank to play at the end of the year in the Palestine Cup, which did happen for a couple of iterations, but Israel got involved and put a stop to that. So even when football was going on, I think there were something like 4 editions of the Palestine Cup that 4 or 5 editions that didn't get played at the end of the day because the Israelis decided we don't want this to go on. So that's kind of what the football pyramid that the Palestine Football Association operates looks like. Now, in addition to that, and something that gets overlooked, and I think it's quite understandable because these people as a population, as a Palestinian population themselves are overlooked, are the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And they actually have an outsized representation within the Israeli football pyramid. So if you go from the 1st to the 5th division, I believe there are 5 divisions in the Israeli system, and you look at the amount of clubs that come from Arab towns, cities, and villages, they make up 40% of the clubs. But obviously, as we know, Palestinian citizens of Israel are only 20% of the population. So they have like an outsized representation factor of 2, which is absolutely remarkable. The question of how do these players get to play for the Palestinian national team is an interesting one. And it's also been an evolution. So when Palestine became recognized by FIFA in 1998, obviously there were a lot of Arab players that they could have chosen from that played for Israeli clubs. But there was a conscious effort, and something that I think I understand, not to select them from the outset and to support kind of the fledgling league. And so the players that represented Palestine were either from the local league or from the diaspora that lived abroad. Lebanon, eventually they found players in Chile and Europe. Slowly, though, I think the Palestinian Football Association came to the realization that, hey, there are players who want to play for Palestine, and it's a win-win. That player gets to experience international football, and we also get a lot of good players. So I'd say in the last 6 or 7 years, it's really picked up. What would happen before would be that the local clubs would look into the green line and see, okay, is there a talented player that we can bring into the local league? And so there sort of would be a first step, which is, go find a Palestinian player playing for an Israeli club, sign him, register him as a Palestinian player, he plays in the league, and then eventually he gets called up for the national team. What's happened now is that step is being skipped altogether. And now the Palestinian Football Association is trying to convince players who still play for Israeli clubs. I mean, they might be Arab-run clubs, but still Israeli clubs that adhere to the Israeli Football Association to represent Palestine. And that has caused a fair amount of panic, drama, kind of this knee-jerk racism on behalf of the Israelis, which we can get into as well, maybe later on in this conversation.
Bassil, I have a follow-up. Israeli racism is it's woven into the fabric, right? But of that society. But just a quick note, actually, on the question of the relationship between football and nationality or national identity. I don't know who asked you that question on that other podcast, but it's all, and I don't know, I'm sure you responded appropriately, but one always remembers, for example, that the United Kingdom is one country technically, but England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland are all different national teams in in FIFA and so forth. So there's always that. But when it comes to the Palestinian national team, you remember that? I'm sure but you guys can remind me the name of the film. But there was that film that came out maybe 7, 8 years ago. Do you remember Field Dreams or Gold Dreams? Remember that about the national team?
Gold Dreams. That was 18 or 19 years ago. So time flies. But yeah.
Okay. Wow. Jesus. That was okay. Anyway, That so it was about the national team meeting to compete maybe in another or to prepare for another World Cup or qualification, obviously for. And I remember the striking thing about that film, what the point that it raised was that since so many Palestinian players come from the diaspora, I remember in that case it was like half of them were from Chile or something like that. They didn't necessarily speak Arabic, right? So here's this national team that has to as you're saying, Bess, it has to reckon with the reality of what it means to be a Palestinian in this far-flung global diaspora that we're all in, because that's what it means to be a Palestinian in all kinds of ways. I mean, in other words, or to rephrase this, when people think about Palestine, they invariably think about the occupation. Of course, that's a big part of Palestinian life. But the other big part of Palestinian life, in fact, the single biggest group of Palestinians are those who live in the diaspora. So it's actually, in that sense, the Palestinian national team, with all of its difficulties and challenges, represents the Palestinian people in a way that many other national institutions actually don't, including the problems of what it means to be a people given colonialism and ethnic cleansing and dispersion and the Nakba and diaspora and so forth. So I'm just wondering if you thought about that, and if you could tell our viewers a little bit more about that film, because I think it seems like it was last year, but obviously I didn't know it was that far back. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I also have a hard time keeping track of time. It does feel that it was like 7 or 8 years ago, but it was actually chronicling Palestine's attempt to qualify for the 2006 World Cup, which doesn't seem that long ago, but it's almost 20 years ago now. Yeah, in any case, I think there's been an evolution in Palestinian football since then, because when they filmed that documentary, they filmed it at kind of the height of the Second Intifada, so there was no league being played. And yeah, in order to compete, I mean, football, any athletic activity, you have to practice on a daily basis, and then you need competitive action on at least a weekly basis, if not a bi-weekly basis. And the local league didn't have that. So yeah, basically the strategy to remain competitive was to rely heavily on the diaspora. Now, what has happened, and it's not like the Palestinian Football Association is amazing, it's got many flaws, and we can talk about that. But one of the few things they guaranteed was there's a league that gets played year in, year out, and that means players are playing, they're getting better, they're improving. Young players are being exposed to a professional setup. They're getting an opportunity to play. Keep in mind also that the Palestinian League doesn't have any foreign players, which is fantastic for youth development. It might not be the best product in the world, but hey, you have a limited amount of players. Next man up is usually whoever you have in the academy. And the reason I mention that is because if you look at the composition of the team now, the last couple of qualifiers they've played, 9 out of the starting 11, 8 out of the starting 11 are born in historic Palestine. And so it's far more homogeneous. Like even in the lineup that we fielded against Kuwait, which was 8 out of the 11 born in Palestine, and then you had Adam Kayed, Milad Termanini, and Wissam Abu Ali, 2 of them born in Sweden, 1 born in Denmark. Those guys speak Arabic well. They speak Arabic very, very well. So there's no sort of language barrier, not a real big cultural barrier. Players understand each other. Now, that said, in that same match against Kuwait that Palestine won 2-0 to keep their World Cup qualifying hopes alive, there was an injury to Ata Jaber after 8 minutes. He had to be substituted. They looked at the bench, and there was a player that they found in Paraguay who's Argentine born. His name is Agustin Mansour, and they trotted him out on the field. He'd only played twice with the national. He only trained for 2 days with the national team before they put him on the pitch. And Agustin Mansour doesn't speak a word of Arabic, doesn't even speak a word of English. So you saw during the cooling break that he had to come to the sideline. And there's another player that is Basque-born, Yasser Hamad Mayor. And Yasser was coming there, and because Yasser lives in Qatar, his Arabic has improved, and he was translating the instructions from the coaching staff to Agustin Mansour, who, by the way, despite only being 24 years old, playing in his first international match, had a fantastic, fantastic game. So, I think the players also help each other. They understand. There's not a lot of cliques within the national team. I think as a group of guys, they understand their responsibility as a team. And when somebody comes in from the diaspora, it's very easy to be like, who's this guy? He can't speak Arabic properly, and he's not like us, and just to kind of put him aside. But the leadership group makes an effort to include everyone. And, I know players that said, hey, like I came into this national team, my Arabic was horrible, or I didn't speak Arabic at all. But the more I spent with these players, I learned, and I improved. And now I speak Arabic at a decent level because of the national team. And I think that shows that, the national team small group of people, just the players that play in it, can also serve as connective tissue for those players that are in the diaspora, that when they come back and play for Palestine, even though now in the past couple of years they haven't played in Palestine, they start to be reintegrated into.
But Bassil, just a quick note, just for the viewers and listeners, perhaps just a reminder that also a lot of international teams, it's not just Palestine. I mean, obviously the Palestine case is exceptional, but a lot of teams have players from other countries who may not speak the language of the national team necessarily, right? I mean, this happens in other parts of the world with other teams, because all sorts of national federations will choose players and just say, okay, there's some relationship, and we're going to take him in.
It happened in Lebanon.
Teams. I'm sure it happened in Lebanon. Yeah, I'm sure it happened.
At one point, they wanted to go out and, when they wanted to do a push many years ago, the 90s, I think, and they said, we have 6 million Lebanese across Brazil and places like that. Surely we can pluck a few from Brazil and bring them and, do something. But that didn't work in the end. There was a lot of integration issues. And so there ended up being some kind of balance where you need, in the end, the core that comes more or less from the country, and then you sprinkle that with some from the outside. But as Bassil is saying, Palestine it's a slightly kind of different case.
It's also worth thinking about, Bassil. It's also worth thinking about the way in which, as you're saying, Palestinian national identity is also reinforced. Like the national team doesn't just take it for granted. The national team helps to produce also a sense of national cohesion and identity, because you're bringing people from all corners of the world to work together. I think that's really, really, really striking.
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of touch on that point about nationality and which players are eligible for Palestine. Look, we live in a globalized world. There's a lot of people who are products of interracial or binational marriage, I guess is the proper term. So you're going to have players that, hey, I was born here, but my parents are from here, or I have one parent from this country, another parent from another country. You're going to have a lot of that. So you're not going to have homogeneous squads. So yes, even the biggest countries pick players born abroad. Italy is a good example. Spain as well. Now that said, FIFA has, I think, kind of loose nationality laws. So you can move to a country, already be a professional footballer, play there for 5 years, get the citizenship, and then represent the country. And so that does lead to some cynical behavior. The UAE right now is really in the midst of a really, really interesting naturalization process, where the majority of players they fielded in their last World Cup qualifier were Brazilian. None of them speak Arabic. They can't sing the national anthem. I think that's a shame. I think that goes against the spirit of the game. And I think they're only cheating themselves and cheating Emirati footballers by doing that. Palestine obviously doesn't have that option because A, they don't bring foreign players into the league when they had a league. And B, even if they did, living 5 years consecutively in Palestine as a foreigner is something the Israelis decide, right? So just some context there for our viewers that don't follow football so closely.
Could we say a word, Bassil, about the Palestine, since you mentioned the Palestinian Football Federation or Association? What is its relationship to the PA, and is it appointed by PA officials, or how does it function in a way different from every other institution run by the PA?
Yeah, so the Palestine Football Association is very closely linked to the PA itself. It's run by a gentleman named Jibril Joub. He was head of the General Preventative Security Forces, so he worked very closely with the Israelis to maintain security in the West Bank during the last years of Yasser Arafat's reign. And he is one of about a dozen or so people trying to become head honcho of the Palestinian Authority. Doesn't know much about football or sports or even had an interest in it, but this is sort of the fiefdom he was given in 2007. And you kind of saw his interest increase after he sort of realized that, hey, it's a great opportunity for me to make a name for myself by using this as a vehicle for my political ambitions. Now, at the outset, he didn't know what he was doing. And if you just look at like Palestine's results when he assumed the presidency of the Palestine Football Association, up until they miraculously qualified for the 2015 Asian Cup, it's really something. Like they were better as a team from, let's say, 2007 than from 2007 to 2012. Like they went on a horrible winless streak, had trouble scoring goals. When they called up players for the national team, it's like they forgot that they had a lot of good players. They just weren't called up for whatever reason. That's how badly things were mismanaged. He lucked into a coach, Jamal Mahmoud, who really grabbed the team by the scruff of the neck. To give you an idea of how poor the situation was, players would report to national team camp and they would have their own kit. So they would all be wearing like different jerseys, usually the jersey of their favorite European club team. So you'd have one guy playing like in a Barcelona shirt, another guy in a Real Madrid shirt, AC Milan, Inter, etc., etc. And that was because they weren't getting funding. Obviously, the PFA was getting funding from FIFA. That was going in every which way direction, and only very little was actually trickling towards the coaches, the players, and the things needed to put a team on the field. 2014 rolls around. They go into qualifying. They're not really the favorites to qualify. They go on this amazing run. They qualify for the Asian Cup in Australia in early 2015. And I think when the team went there, and just because it's English-speaking country, obviously, because it's an English-speaking country, it has sort of an outsized media presence. Jibril Ayoub saw that and he was like, oh, wait, actually, like I stand to benefit here. Maybe I should actually throw more money towards like the actual football things. And from that point, you saw the team improve and improve and improve, only because the PFA does like the basic bare minimum funding of the team. So it's not great, but from my sources inside the Palestine Football Association, they tell me that it's actually, for as bad as it is, it's actually run better than a lot of the other ministries within the Palestinian Authority, which is shocking because I have some stories, and it's for that to be the case is really, 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 really shocking.
Yeah, so Bassil, just to make this transition from the PFA, the Palestine Football Association, to the larger level of FIFA, which is of course, the association, the global association that runs international football, including the World Cup qualifying games, but other things as well, and the attempts to try to get them kicked out of FIFA games, as well as and UEFA, which runs the European kind of football associations, in which a lot of the Israeli club teams are playing in European competition. So those, both at the club level and at the national level, they've both been continuing throughout this genocide, even before the genocide. Of course, they should have been kicked out, but especially accelerated during this genocide with a lot of attempts to try to kick them out. Can you talk to us a little bit about where things stand on that? First of all, just descriptively, can you just remind us what is the relationship between FIFA and the Palestine or any national association? So what is that relationship on the one hand? On the other hand, why are the Israelis playing in Europe anyway, in the UEFA? And what is this campaign to try to kick the Israelis out of FIFA during this genocide period? I know that's a lot, but maybe if you can just unpack a little bit.
And just to add one more thing, of course, but I'm sure Bassil will talk about this, but of course, Russia, soon after the invasion of Ukraine, was expelled from UEFA and FIFA and the Olympics and everything else within, I think, a matter of weeks, if not days, of the invasion of Ukraine. Whereas the Israelis, here they are, 75 years into dispossession and apartheid and now genocide, and they're still, it's like business as usual for as far as the world football and European football communities are concerned.
Yeah, so I think to kind of understand this, you sort of have to look a little bit back in the history, right? And we can sort of start with, well, why does Israel play in UEFA? Why don't they play in the AFC? And the thing is, Israel was a member of the AFC. And
the AFC being the Asian. Sorry, Bassel, just to make sure because of the acronym. So yeah, the Asian. So they're playing with the Europeans, not with the Asians.
Yeah, so for those who don't follow football, basically the world is divided into continents, and each continent has its own continental competition. So the European Championships are the one that are the most popular, but you have Copa America, in Asia you have the Asian Cup, and basically they are all the continental competition of the independent confederations, which all report into FIFA. And so Israel was a founding member of the Asian Football Confederation. What you have to remember is that when they became a founding member in the early 50s, the world was a very different place. Colonialism was still a very real thing. And the other kind of associations were places like Hong Kong. I think Chinese Taipei, the Republic of China, was also a member. So completely different world that they were in. What happened in the 60s and the 70s is decolonization happened as the British left the Arabian Gulf. You started to get these new federations. One of those federations, the one that was the most active, Kuwait, joined the AFC. And the people who ran the Kuwaiti Football Association put it in their mind that Israel should not be allowed to play in the Asian Football Confederation for a whole host of reasons, namely racism, occupation, and the things that we associate Israel with. And in order to do that, what the Kuwaiti Football Association did at the time was they made it their mission to go around the Arab world and actually get other Arab FAs to sign up for the Asian Football Confederation. And that eventually gave them a quorum where they could vote on the matter of getting Israel kicked out of the Asian Football Confederation, which they did in, I believe, early 1970s, either 1972 or 1974. I don't want to get the facts wrong, but early 70s. At that point, Israel was without a confederation, and Israel back in the 70s also had it in their mind of like, hey, let's go play in Europe anyway. We see ourselves as European. Let's go play in UEFA, and that didn't happen until the early 90s. And you have to ask yourself why. And remarkably, also the Kuwaitis at that time made it their mission to make sure that Israel didn't get into UEFA. And in 1978, they got wind of the fact that Israel was going on sort of a tour around the world to try and convince, because they needed to convince enough members of FIFA to allow them into UEFA. And Kuwait sort of got wind of that, interceded, and made sure that they didn't join UEFA. And that ended up being the case until 1993.
How exactly? Is it through just diplomatic initiatives or through law? I mean, how would the Kuwaitis do that?
Yeah, wouldn't say diplomat. I guess it's a form of diplomacy, but federation to federation contact. And I think this is how FIFA works. These are old men in suits. There's personal relationships. The Kuwaiti FA was very well established in Asia. Israel needed the votes. They weren't going to get the votes from Africa because all the countries in Africa saw Israel as part and parcel of what South Africa was doing at the time, and they needed to pick up some votes in Asia to kind of get the quorum that they needed in the FIFA Congress to allow for them to join a new confederation. And so that didn't happen, mostly because the Kuwaiti FA went to Southeast Asia and convinced those nations, hey, do not vote for this motion at the 1978 FIFA Congress in, I think it was in Buenos Aires at the time. So you had, I think, very different types of people, very principled people running football in the region at that time. Also, I think you have to understand that FIFA was a completely different beast. FIFA struggled to make money up until like the mid to late 80s, when they understood that, hey, you can sign sponsorship agreements and the like, and TV deals and all of that. So in the 70s, this was really just people who kind of ran the sport and dusty offices all around the world that came together. There wasn't a lot of money to be made, and the money that was to be made was around the World Cup and selling tickets. So South Africa, for example, got the boot because if even 10% of the viewing public is disgusted by the fact that South Africa is participating in football and then decides to boycott your flagship event, a 10% drop in revenue when you only make revenue once every 4 years is absolutely catastrophic. Now, unfortunately, That's not the case anymore. And so I think a different type of strategy is needed. But to pick up on the idea of this campaign to kick Israel out of FIFA, I think it was dead during the Oslo Accords, and then slowly started to pick up momentum after the Second Intifada. And this is something that happened completely at the grassroots level, mostly in Europe. And the Palestinian Football Association had no part in it, but they made enough noise. And I think they made a lot of noise around the fact that Israel in 2013 hosted the under 21 Euros, which was absolutely despicable. And the grassroots campaign didn't succeed. They weren't able to get that tournament moved, but they made a lot of noise. They raised a lot of awareness. And, I think an argument is to be made that when they did that ridiculous Euros that was not hosted in one country, but in cities all over Europe, Jerusalem wasn't picked as a host city because UEFA didn't want the headache of that. Now, when the PFA saw this, they tried to co-opt the campaign, which is a positive. But if you're going to co-opt the campaign, you need to have a strategy to be able to use your power to kind of translate a good idea into an effective strategy to actually reach your goal. And I think the Palestinian Football Association didn't have that, doesn't have that now. They tried to kick out Israel after the 2014 assault on Gaza. And listen, they have a good case, but I don't think the people who are in the Palestine Football Association they don't really understand how FIFA functions. And so it's not, oh, look, the law is on our side. If it was like, if you just went to an international court and presented our case, you guys would be out of business. You wouldn't have a podcast the conflict would be solved because obviously the law is on our side. Things sort of reached a head in 2015 and people said, oh, you're going to vote on it. And it did go to the to kind of like the FIFA's version of the General Assembly, the Congress, for a motion to vote on it. And in really, really bizarre circumstances, Jibril Rajoub withdrew the motion at the last minute. Now, whether he withdrew the motion because he didn't have enough votes, which is a huge indictment as to what the heck were you doing for the past year when you were trying to get this passed, that you didn't actually go and do the lobbying that you would need to do to get the votes, or whether or not he was going to fail and he was afraid of being associated with failure and that's why he withdrew the motion, is an open question. We don't really know what happened there, but he withdrew it. And that remains a huge missed opportunity because back then FIFA was more democratic. Now FIFA kind of looks like the UN in that you have you sort of have two bodies. You have the Congress, which is the 200 odd associations all around the world, and then you have this like executive committee that is about 30 odd people that are all Gianni Infantino, that's the FIFA president. They're all his buddies, and they're the ones that kind of really decide on important matters. And in order to get things done in FIFA, you need those 30. So that means you need to go and you need to lobby and you need to make a case. And I don't see the Palestine Football Association doing that. In 2024, when there was a FIFA Congress in Bangkok, Jibril Rajoub was a late arrival because he wanted to go to Dublin because the women's national team was playing against Bohemian FC. And so he was there for the first couple of days of the FIFA Congress when he should have been in the FIFA Congress trying to lobby, trying to make his case. And I think they're still trying to do the same thing over and over and over again, and they're getting the same results. This is the 5th or 6th time because they just had the FIFA Congress last month. And again, they have to study the matter. They talk about, oh, we did this for human rights and we did this against racism. And in the same conference, they say, oh, like we've kicked it to the experts because we have to study the matter more. And they're going to continue to do this because FIFA doesn't want any part of this. It's not good for their bottom line. It's a different world now. Now the United States is involved in football. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, the United States was a peripheral figure. Now they're involved. Now their companies are involved. They fund the football. So you can imagine that FIFA doesn't want to do anything.
Sorry to interrupt. So the FIFA doesn't, it's not like the UN, it's more like the General Assembly, right? In the sense that there's no veto. I mean, the US or the big footballing countries, so to speak, don't have a veto within the FIFA structure, right? So this is just if you do lobby, you can get somewhere. So the issue is it more America or is it more the money people? It's the sponsorship people. It's the big companies and corporations that basically own a lot of FIFA, and so it's the money people that don't want the so-called controversy, right? Rather than the countries per se.
Yeah,
Because those countries, I think, would be limited. There's some Europeans, some the Americans, some Europeans, some of these kinds of countries, but the majority presumably would go along with such a ban. But the influencers, the companies, the corporations, these kinds of things, universally probably are against it.
yeah, it's like the UN in the fact that in order to get something in front of the Congress, you need the executive committee. They're not called the executive committee because they rebranded after the huge corruption scandal. But you need Infantino and his friends to say, this is an article that's going to go to the Congress to vote on. And that is kind of making the process less democratic. So it would have been maybe possible in 2015 to get Israel banned. Now you're stuck in this loop of Infantino and his friends and trying to convince them. Obviously, there's outside influence for the corporation from a corporate standpoint. That's not really tied with the U.S. Soccer Federation per se, but all those corporations that fund FIFA, they're mostly American. If they're not American, they're American power adjacent, so to speak. So if you're going to ask me what next and what should be done, I think they need to change strategy. If you keep doing something over and over and over and over again, you keep getting the same result every single time, then you have to kind of change tack and think about a different strategy. And after the fifth or sixth time where they say, oh, we were still studying the matter, when it's blatantly obvious that they should be kicked out, then you need to change strategy. And I think you can look at the Ukraine-Russia situation and draw a lot of inspiration from that, because when Russia invaded Ukraine, FIFA's gut instinct was not to kick Russia out. Infantino had this plan where the Russians were still going to play, and it was in the middle of qualifying for Qatar 2022, and they were going to play, but there was going to be no Russian flag, no Russian anthem, and they were just going to play in like plain white shirts with no Russian insignia. And that's because, the old axiom of like, we separate sport from politics. This is what Infantino wanted. And UEFA really didn't know what to do either. But the people who pushed the point were the players themselves. It was the captains of Poland, Czechia, and Sweden that were going to play in this mini playoff to decide who would go to the World Cup, who just put their foot down and said, hey, listen, we will not play Russia. And if that's going to cost us a spot at the World Cup, that's fine. But to play Russia right now is a farce. They took that stance. And okay, it helps that, one of the captains is Robert Lewandowski, is a huge star. And also the captain of Czechia is Souček, who's known. And the captain of Sweden is Forsberg, who's also famous. So it helped that you have more recognizable players. But their FAs backed them. That forced UEFA's hand. UEFA backed them. And then, FIFA had to cave. Okay, it's a lot easier when the world's superpower kind of agrees with you to back you up. It's not exactly difficult, but it just goes to show you that the administrators of the game are scared. They don't want to they don't want to take an activist position. And if you're looking for power structures, yeah, the game has a lot more money in it, and it's a lot more corporate, and it's not like the 60s and 70s. But hey, why hasn't the Palestine Football Association engaged with the players? Because the players have outsized influence now. And if you can convince the players to do something, then you might be able to get somewhere. And the Palestine Football Association hasn't even thought about changing tack, changing strategy, and talking to some of the players, which may, result in something useful happening.
So this is the same. This sounds Bassil. We've gone through this theme on the show, on this podcast, so many times about the problem point, or one of the problem points is always going back to the PA, and it's sort of lack of imagination, or it's collaboration, or whatever it is. And you seem to be sort of echoing and reinforcing that point. But in terms of the strategy going forward, how much is popular pressure in Europe and European games? Karim is always sharing with me and with all of us these images that come out of Europe, out of whether it's Celtic or other places, PSG recently, where you have this kind of whole thing of fans themselves, European fans, or fans in Europe at least, who are increasingly unhappy and demonstrating vocally about Israel's inclusion in the middle of a genocide, and that it's not normal, it's not okay, something has to be done. To what extent is that an avenue that can be, or that is being exploited or tapped in that sense? Is there, in other words, some sense of maybe a possible path going down that way? So that's one question. And then a follow-up question is about your peers in European journalism, football journalism. To what extent have they spoken out? It seems to me very few have actually said anything about the Gaza genocide. They talked a lot about Ukraine. They talk a lot about sports washing, so-called, but very little about Palestine. So two separate questions: popular pressure and your peers in sports journalism.
Look, I think popular pressure is always welcome, right? Because that goes, we all live in our own silos, right? We all have our peers in our workplace or in our social circles, and sometimes we're all alike, so we think alike, and we just speak to each other, and we think that we are actually the majority, when in fact, like, we're just people that agree with one another, and we are not the majority. The popular action we see being taken by Celtic, by PSG, by Vallecano, even clubs that aren't associated with the political left, so to speak. Lazio, for example, like one of the most right-wing parties I can imagine. Even they have fans that wave the Palestinian flag and speak out on the issue. It's effective, but it's also limited. And the reason why it's limited is because European football has become commoditized. It is a product. And at its essence, these are all community institutions, right? Like, PSG is not a brand. PSG represents a certain arrondissement in Paris, working class people, the immigrants of Paris. And when they decide to speak out about the genocide and put that banner, it does speak to what the people on the street are thinking. But Celtic gets a lot of plaudits. For example, I think it's probably the most famous club that speaks out on the Palestinian issue in Europe. But those are the Celtic fans, and that's different from the Celtic board. The Celtic board would love nothing more than for those people to disappear. So the fans and the board are not really simpatico. And because of that, you have this really weird situation where, okay, you can get a flag there, and you can get signs of support, which is great. I'm not dismissing that. But to get a club to do something concrete, it's very difficult to imagine that happening, because that's not what they want. Like, anybody who goes and buys a football club or operates a football club starts talking about it. Oh, it's a product. Oh, we have to go on tour. Oh, we have to grow the brand. And really, at the end of the day, if they could delete probably the fans that they currently have and replace them with rich fans from Asia and America that fly in for every single game and pay 10x, 100x for the ticket, they would do that because they run a business. And they aren't really connected to the fabric of the club. So I'm not sure if there's anything we can get out of it other than to put the pressure and to continue to do that and direct it maybe in a better fashion. Right now, it's just been supporters groups and this grassroots campaign called Show Israel the Red Card that's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Obviously, if a football association gets involved, then you can amplify that. And then just to touch on your point about my European peers and the fact that they haven't spoken about it, I mean, you're in a really ridiculous situation now where there's a huge tifo. There are Palestinian flags all over a stadium. And it's like the emperor has no clothes, Like,
can you explain, sorry, Bassil, can you explain what a tifo is?
Yeah, so a tifo is a very, very large banner that is flown usually behind one of the goals. So like the active supporter groups in football stadiums sit behind one of the goals, and they sort of direct the choreography and they chant for the entire 90 minutes. It's a very active form of supporting your football club. Again, I think journalists are some of the biggest cowards out there. I know I'm part and parcel of the union, but like, people are worried about losing commission. If you are employed full time, you don't want to lose that fancy gig. What your editors want to hear about are the things that are allowed to talk about. Or you want to do something that's a little bit on fringe, that's melding sports with politics. There are safe things that we can talk about. I spoke about how this game is becoming a commodity and foreign money is coming in and foreigners are coming to buy clubs. And it's not so much that they're foreign, but the fact that there are hedge funds, capital investments groups, states that come and buy this. And now all of a sudden we're in this situation where the only bad guys, the only bad money in football is money that is associated with Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and these Arab countries. And that's bad money. But if you're some, finance ghoul, you run a hedge fund, you made your money in probably some horrible ways, you're invested in fossil fuels, you name it, that's totally fine. And it's like, if Inter beat PSG in the final, that's still Oak Tree Capital Investment that is heavily invested in Saudi Arabia that won the Champions League. It's not, it's not like your local neighborhood club that won it. And the fact that they're allowed to speak and they're allowed to talk about the stuff that's, that's kind of political, but it's only directed towards the proper targets. I mean, how often have we heard about human rights and labor rights and all these things about Qatar? And that's not to say that there isn't like a good faith argument to make about that and about the upcoming World Cup in Saudi Arabia. But we heard about it all the time. And now, there's a genocide happening, and they literally used one of Gaza's football stadiums as a concentration camp. And there are pictures of that. And yeah, most journalists are just not, it's like it doesn't happen. Their hand is in the sand. So it's very frustrating to see, unfortunately.
Bassil, it seems kind of inevitable that the only path forward really is at the level of grassroots action, because anything connected to the PA is ultimately going to be at best incompetent and at worst collusive and corrupt and so forth. I'm sure you've seen the recent polls showing how much support there is for Palestine, or rather also how poor the status is of Israelis in not just, of course, in the third world, where that's always been true, but in Europe and the U.S. and so forth. I mean, like the numbers are in the recent Pew poll that came out that showed the percent of people with a negative attitude towards the Israelis it's in European countries. It's even in places like Germany, where you wouldn't expect it. It's like well over 60% in Germany, and higher in other countries besides. So it seems like there's a groundswell of popular opinion that just needs to be. Of course, I know that's easy to talk about and much harder to actually do, but it seems like the goodwill is effectively there. I mean, I don't know if you have ideas about how to mobilize that goodwill that's there, or maybe you're also saying, yeah, there's goodwill at the popular level, but we're up against these beasts of corporate finance and state politics, and of course, lurking everywhere is the lobby, no doubt, saying, if you do this, we're going to say you're anti-Semitic and so on and so forth. I'm sure that's also a pressure that they're all aware of. But so there's that. That's one question. Then, like as a subsidiary question, I want to ask you, because you made the point that when it came to Russia, because I'm sure those same influences must have been there too. You said when it came to the case of expelling Russia, the big influencers were some of the players like Lewandowski and others who said, I don't want to play with these guys. Aren't there football players who would hold a similar attitude about playing with with this appalling, reviled country up to its eyes in blood and death and genocide and so forth? Surely nobody wants to actually be on a football field with these people. I mean, I remember a few years ago, like the last World Cup in Qatar, I remember various countries holding out the Palestinian flag, like Morocco most famously. But after which FA Cup was it where the Leicester City people who won the FA Cup held up a Palestinian flag at the end of them? In other words, it seems like somewhere there's some kind of awareness. I don't know. Maybe just tell me. Maybe I'm being naive. Tell me, Sari, you're dreaming that's not going to happen because of these corporate, national, political kinds of pressures. I don't know. What do you think? Is there any hope here of a grassroots mobilization, whether from among players or directed at players or fans or whatever, or is it just going to be outweighed by the lobbyists and the people with money and this kind of thing? I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think there's definitely still hope, and I don't want to dismiss everyone's effort at the grassroots level. I still think it is amazing that almost every single football match in Europe, it's not even like impressive anymore to see a Palestinian flag in the stands. It's like, oh yeah, that's there. Maybe less the case in the Premier League, but everywhere across Europe, France, Spain, Italy, it's always there. And then sometimes even bigger than that, it's a banner or even a full-size tifo. So that is not to be dismissed, especially since, as I covered before, the administrators don't want that to happen. at all. So it's important to keep up the pressure, and it's important to keep this in the forefront of people's mind. And at the end of the day, these people might own the football clubs, but football is a community outlet. It still reflects the opinions of the people on the street. So I think it's still important to have that. Now that said, we have to start looking at things a little bit differently. When we talk about football, we have to decolonize it a little bit, because our focus is almost always on European football. We don't talk about football anywhere else in the world but Europe, and usually like the top 0.1%, your Champions League clubs. That's what we talk about. That's what our focus is about. We don't really talk about much else. I get that it is from a playing perspective, it is the best players, but at the same time, we also have to, I think, examine ourselves and look to ourselves to tell our own story and find our own people to deliver that message. And that's why I think it's super important to support the Palestinian national team. Yes, the PFA, which is linked to the Palestinian Authority, operates them, but the players themselves, as a group of 23, 26 young men, are fantastic people. And what they're doing right now is, I think, the best medium to get the message across about what's happening in Palestine. This is why it's really important that if we can get to a World Cup finals that will be held mostly in the United States, it would be amazing to have that. So I don't think that there is no hope out of this. Yeah, we can maybe approach some of the players. Yes, there can be some sort of campaign, but that needs to have direction, because if a player sticks his neck out, he can get canceled very, very quickly. He can lose a contract very, very quickly for speaking up. And they're less likely to do that the less affiliated, so to speak, they are with Palestine. So, if they're not Palestinian themselves, or if they're not Arab, or perhaps if they're not Muslim, or perhaps they didn't grow up in a community where this was spoken about a lot, it's less likely to get them to do that. So you need to find a campaign that a critical mass of footballers can sign up to, and an action that is easy for them to take, effective for them to take, to put the pressure on. That is something 100% we can do. I think it would be it'd be a lot easier to get that campaign executed if you had Palestinian footballers speaking to their counterparts in Europe about what they go through. Because, for the elite players in Europe to think about, oh, look, there's a Palestinian national team at a World Cup, how did they do that? And just to look at the hurdles they had to overcome, I think that's the best way to do it, to use our national team as a medium to communicate and then to push a campaign to kick Israel out of FIFA.
But sorry, just a quick question. Sorry, can I just interrupt? So I'm sorry, I apologize. But Bassil, just on the point, just to go back maybe one last time about the journalists. So is it that your peers in journalism is it that they're aware of what's going on and they're afraid and they have made a decision that this is too controversial and we don't want to go there? Or is it that there are still many European journalists who support Israel or just, do you see what I'm saying? And which is it? Is it a question of just fear, and that therefore there's a barrier that has to be broken about fear and cowardice or whatever it is, or careerism? Or is it something else? Do you see that? Is there, that's really what I'm trying to, because I think about, there are several journalists and sports broadcasters who have spoken out. And you're right, thus far it's been sort of, they get cancelled very quickly, they get shamed, they get attacked, they get harassed, they get accused of being anti-Semitic.
Players
Ozil,
too,
of course.
some
Players too. And
so journalists, we saw now Gary Lineker, what happened to him on Match of the Day and BBC.
And then Ozil before, and then Anwar El-Ghazi, I think the guy in Holland, was he in Dutch or Holland or Germany, where he was, who lost his contract. And, and there are players who've spoken out time and again. But so just a sense of, I guess I'm asking, is it fear or is it identity still with Israel as a European that you see among your peers as journalists?
Look, I think you probably would find more support for Palestine amongst the players. I think that just has more to do with the fact that they are, or at least grew up as normal people. And yeah, if you grew up in a working class neighborhood in a European city, you probably would have more affinity towards the Palestinian cause to begin with. The journalists, I don't want to paint everyone with a broad brush, but most of us, myself included, we work on commission. So in order to kind of speak out about something, you need to get commissioned about it, right? And if you want to go and even me myself, I wanted to write about the Palestinian national team for The Athletic, which is owned by the New York Times. They were having none of that. You want to go to ESPN. ESPN is owned by Disney. I remember I got a commission to write about the Palestinian national team at the Asian Cup. I came with a product, with a draft to them, and they're like, "Oh no, it's going to take way too much time to like verify all the claims here." And it's like, yeah, what do you want me to do? The situation is that there is a genocide happening in Gaza. You don't have to call it even a genocide, but you need to quote that, hey, this happened. Like this player's family is stuck. The assistant coach for the Olympic team was killed. These are facts. Like, you asked me to write about the Palestine national team. I don't know what you were expecting as a result. Like, you asked for this, and then they go and they think, oh no, it's too controversial. We can't do this. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, there are some journalists in that group that are ideologically committed to Israel. There's no doubt about that. We see that in traditional journalism or non-sports journalism as well. And yeah, I also just think that there isn't the right medium, because you can speak about the campaign, but speaking about the campaign is literally speaking about something that's happening off the pitch. And if you had people writing about the Palestine national team, then in a very natural way, what's going on in Gaza, Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people for the past 77 years would be front and center of any sort of conversation you have. So I think, it's a bit of both. That if you are a salaried football writer, you are probably writing about a European league week in, week out, because that's where the attention and that's where the money is. If you're someone like myself, you're not salaried, nobody employs you, you work on a freelance basis and you speak about niche Arab and Asian football, completely different, doesn't have a lot of attention. So yeah, there isn't really an answer. I'm just kind of explaining, but that's kind of the situation we're in right now as journalists.
Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense, in the sense of who's writing about the Palestine football team. People like yourself and some colleagues such as yourself who then won't get the commissions. So you're writing them on your blogs, or you're writing them for particular outlets that people like us will read, maybe, but not the mainstream, necessarily the mainstream. And as I understood you saying that you were commissioned for something, but then when you showed up with an actual article, they're like, "Oh, this is too controversial, so we're not going to get it out." And then when a young journalist or any kind of journalist looks and sees what happens to Gary Lineker at the BBC, and is basically him being fired as a result of his showing, what they call politics, but basically some compassion with the Palestinian children being butchered in Gaza, he gets fired. And people will look at that and say, well, if that happens to him, what about the rest of us, right? There's a kind of knock-on effect in that, and it's a very effective one for sure. So, but I want to get to this final as we wrap. I want to get to where the Palestine football team is now. But I would be remiss. I really need to ask you about the Arab player who, as far as I know, hasn't spoken very much, and that's Mohamed Salah, Egypt, Liverpool and Egypt, who's adored, right, by millions, if not hundreds of millions of people, who's by far the most popular Arab player. And I'm not talking about Zidane people, but Arab-born, one of the greatest players to play for Liverpool. Should we be expecting people like that to talk? Maybe he is, that I haven't seen, but it certainly hasn't made any kind of splash. I know, since we're in this particular podcast, we're all kind of Arsenal people. Hamad El-Neni, who is his Egyptian colleague and player who played for Arsenal, said something at the beginning of the genocide, and he was attacked quite strenuously, even as another teammate, Zinchenko, was talking a lot about Ukraine and showing up with the Ukraine flag, and was allowed to be captain for a game, in solidarity with Ukraine, etc. But when Mohamed El-Neni opened his mouth about Gaza, again purely in a kind of compassionate kind of way, he was, immediately attacked and in effect disciplined. And unfortunately, at Arsenal, we also saw a kitman who was recently fired for I think was private social media account, kind of again showing solidarity with Palestinians. He was fired. He's now suing the club. And as I was recently reading an interview with him where he's saying it's been after 20 years as a working with youth players and as a kitman and as other youth development type things at Arsenal, he's unable to find very much of a job, and he's working sort of some kind of, I don't know what he's doing now, but he's finding difficulty even finding a job. When you get fired at this high level, of course your name kind of goes out. So what are we supposed to expect with high profile people like Mohamed Salah who don't need the money? It's not like they're gonna, they're set, their money is set, their reputation is set. What do we expect for players like that, and the kind of example that they would set?
I mean, all pertinent points. Some players have spoken up, others haven't. Look, Mohamed Salah, to each his own. And honestly, if you don't feel like you want to speak up about Palestine, you're a free man. You can do what you want. I think I would have preferred him to say nothing rather than to put out that video where it looked like he had been kidnapped. He spoke about a horrible situation and people dying, but never once mentioned Palestine or occupation or anything. He just said this needed to stop, and then he never said anything ever again. It was sad, quite frankly. Yeah, he doesn't need the money. A lot of these guys don't. I mean, Salah in particular really didn't need the money, and his reputation had been sealed. And even if his contract wasn't renewed by Liverpool, there would be no shortage of suitors to take him on. But if you don't feel obliged to speak up about Palestine, that's fine. If your priority is securing the bag, that's also fine. No one is obliged. And I'd much rather focus on the people that did speak up. There have been some prominent players, Karim Benzema, the most prominent amongst them, and he spoke out. And then far-right politicians started saying we should strip him of his French citizenship, which is ridiculous because he's like a third-generation Frenchman, and he's one of the leading scorers of the French national team. Look, I mean, you can focus on the players that haven't spoken up. I choose to focus on the players that have spoken up. Again, I think we're kind of looking at it from a very colonial, Eurocentric lens, because Mohamed Abu Trika, who I think is one of the best footballers that I've ever seen grace a pitch, is on beIN Sports week in, week out in the Arab world, and he always mentions what's going on in Gaza. Yeah, I don't think any player speaking up right now is going to tilt the balance in favor. I think we've spoken for over an hour, and we've sort of sussed out what the power structure is like in European football. But that's why I think it's just more important for us to take control of the narrative. And if you support a European football club and they're acting in a way that that doesn't please you, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, football is a commodity. It is a product in Europe, unfortunately, and you are not so much a fan but a consumer. So let your money do the talking. If you're upset with what Arsenal did to their kit man, which I think everybody should be, don't buy Arsenal's new kit. Don't buy any Arsenal gear. And if you can, stream the matches in a stream the matches in a way where you don't give money to the club. Let's put it that way. I don't want to encourage anyone to break the law, but find ways to let your money do the talking. And even if it's a drop in the bucket, at least you're not complicit, because the clubs feel confident doing this because they're like, who cares that our supporters group came out and said something against genocide? We've got all these fans out in China and in India and God knows where else that are going to buy our kit next season, and that's what matters. Our U.S. preseason tour is what matters, and we'll make money there. And things that we don't want to be spoken about, we'll make sure that they get silenced. So that would be my advice to I think football fans out there. Don't stress out about this player didn't speak out about it. If he didn't speak out about it and you wanted him to speak out about it, don't support him. You can go and support another player that did speak out about it, and he probably deserves your support more.
Just a shout out here for Sam Mursi, by the way, who's the captain of Ipswich Town, who unfortunately just got relegated from the top division in England, who speaks out regularly for Palestine. He's Egyptian, I think, and he speaks out quite a bit. So there's a lot of courage coming from him, and really I wanted to mention him because he's been, I think, among the most prominent to speak out, at least in the English setting. So Bassil, just to kind of to finish up this discussion, I wanted to get back to what we started with, which is the Palestine national team. A few days ago, the Palestine football team beat Kuwait 2-0 to take us to the kind of final round of matches in this group stages against tomorrow. Today is June 9th, so tomorrow's the game is June 10 against Oman. I think away. I don't know where they're playing it, but if you could just set this up if just kind of get us through a little bit the group stages, because in the Asian context, it's a very long process for a team to qualify for the World Cup. In any case, it's a kind of very long, convoluted process, and Palestine is at the cusp of possibly entering the final kind of qualifying round that might then lead them to qualify for the World Cup, which is in the United States, very ironically, in a year's time, in 2026. So please, can you set this up and maybe talk about the prospects of Palestine actually winning?
Yeah, so you are correct in saying that Asian World Cup qualifying is a long and convoluted process. I'll do my best to explain what the format is now. For those that don't follow football, the World Cup used to be a 32-team tournament, and then somewhat controversially, they decided to expand the tournament to 48 teams, mostly because teams from outside of Europe deserved a chance, but Europe was never going to give up their spots, so they just decided to expand from 32 teams to 48. Obviously, to get from 200-something to 48, you have to play qualifiers. And in Asia, those qualifiers started back in October 2023. There are 46 football associations in Asia. They played a preliminary amongst the 20 lowest ranked teams. Palestine didn't participate because they were ranked too high. And that field of 20 teams got reduced to 10 teams. Those 10 teams joined the other 26 in round two. Round two was 9 groups of 4 teams. They played home and away. And so in Palestine's group, they were grouped with Australia, Lebanon, and Bangladesh. Couldn't host games. In previous World Cup qualifying campaigns, they have a small stadium in Ram, which is in the Jerusalem Governorate, where they used to host matches, but because of COVID and now the genocide, they haven't played a game there in 5.5 years. Long story short, they made it out of that group. They finished second. And so those 36 teams became 18. And this is where we are right now in round 3. And this is also the first round that actually teams can possibly qualify. So in each group of 6 teams, the top 2 of each group qualify directly. The bottom 2 are eliminated. And then the middle 2, third and fourth place, go on to round 4, where you get another 2 Asian finalists to bring the total field up to 8. The second place in that next round, in round 5, they'll play against each other home and away. And then there's another intercontinental playoff that will decide possibly if Asia sends a 9th team. Where we are right now is that we've played 9 out of the 10 matches. So in Palestine's group, they had South Korea, which is a World Cup perennial participant, has been at every single World Cup since 1986. They had Iraq, Jordan, Oman, and Kuwait. Things started off well back in September 2024. First game was away to Korea. They drew 0-0. They even had a chance to win the game at the death. They also had a goal ruled off for offsides because the player's shoulder was leaning offsides. They played very well in that game. And then really the next 4 games, things did not go so well. They lost to Jordan in a game that was their home game but hosted in Malaysia. They lost away to Iraq. They hosted Kuwait in Qatar, and that was a game they really needed to win because Kuwait was the lowest ranked team in the group. They drew 2-2. They went to Oman in Muscat. They lost 1-0. So at the halfway point, Palestine had 2 points from 5 matches. So they were on course to just collect 4 points, and 4 points is not going to get you even to the playoff. And then something interesting happened because, after that brutal loss to Oman, they traveled to Jordan to host Korea. They took a lead against Korea, and they ended up drawing 1-1. PFA decided to change coaches, and maybe it's a new manager bounce. Maybe they needed fresh blood in the team, what have you. Things started to change. So the last qualifying window in March, Palestine played against Jordan. Jordan's kind of their bogey team. They lost to them played well, but lost to them, which usually happens for Palestine when they play Jordan. And then they ended up in this scenario where they had 3 finals. A game against Iraq at home in Jordan, so their home game, which is not really a home game. And then 2 matches in June. Kuwait away, Oman once again in Jordan. They're home away from home. And Palestine has never beaten Iraq in their entire history since joining FIFA in 1998, and even the couple times they played against Iraq before FIFA affiliation, they'd never beaten them. And it looked like it was going to be one of those stories where, Palestine plays well, they went down a goal in the first half, time is ticking, they're missing chances. And then they score in the 88th minute. And I was in the stadium, I was fortunate enough to be in the stadium, and there was just some energy that you knew that they could get a second goal. And they kept pushing, and the last kick of the game, they scored to make it 2-1. And I think that first win in the round gave Palestine such belief that now they're playing with house money. They have absolutely no pressure. They went away to Kuwait, which is tricky because the pitch wasn't in the best condition. It's ridiculously hot and humid, even if you play at 9:15 at night in Kuwait City. Took care of business there, beat Kuwait 2-0. And now they have this momentum. They've won 2 games on the trot. Oman hasn't done that in the entire qualifying round. And Oman sort of came in to this month thinking, hey, we beat Jordan at home, and then we have Palestine, and maybe we can even qualify directly. And things didn't go to script for the Omanis. They lost 3-0 at home to Jordan, played horribly. And so as far as momentum, as far as emotions is concerned, Palestine is peaking at the right time. Oman is not in the best of circumstances. The only thing I would say to caution against having too much overconfidence is that Oman just needs a draw to get to the next round. Palestine needs a win. But if they do it, then they would be 2 games away from a World Cup. They would play against 2 other teams in October, and win both of those games, or get a win and a draw, or maybe even 2 draws. And Palestine could be at a World Cup, which is absolutely incredible to think.
Yeah, that is amazing, and hopefully we can sort of end on this note of optimism and hope. I mean, by the time this recording comes out, I guess people listening will probably already know the results. But just as we close, I wanted to ask a final question, which is on the women's team, the Palestine national women's team. Is this something that that you can tell us a little bit more about? I know that they were I think they only were created, or the team came together maybe a decade ago or something like this. And what their journey has been, what has their journey been like? And is there, I guess they're also run by the Palestine Football Association, the PFA. How does that work? Is there a, some kind of grassroots kind of thing going, or can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so the Palestinian women's team has been around since the early 2000s, so they've been around for a while. Obviously, everything I've said about the men's team, you can just double it for the women's team. I mean, if the men don't get enough support, you can just imagine what the women's team would be left with. It took a very long time for the PFA to create a league. Once they did get around to it, obviously it was only a couple of years until October 7th happened, and now that's also on pause. It's been very interesting to see their development, though, in recent years. What I think everybody in the world has realized with women's football is you can go and mine the diaspora for talent, and Palestinians live everywhere. And so there are women, female players that play in different leagues in Europe, Scandinavia, Germany, the United States, Canada, even Arab clubs inside Israel as well. They've drawn players from there, and they've sort of made up for a lack of quality in the local league by bringing all these players together, and their results have improved. I know at the end of the month they'll attempt to qualify for the Women's Asian Cup. I think it's going to be a tough sled for them because they have North Korea in their group, and only the group winner qualifies. And North Korea is ranked the 9th best team in the world. So good to see their progress. The under 20 women's team won a West Asian Cup, which none of the men's team has done at any level. They beat Jordan in the final, which is even all that much more sweeter. So good to see the progress there from the women's team. They're probably, a little bit behind the men's team as far as their development is concerned, but I think I expect good things from them in the near future, hopefully.
Okay, fantastic. So that's a good optimistic way, I think, to end. And again, let's hope for the best in terms of the results tomorrow, and potentially qualification, potentially on the cards in the coming days and weeks and months. So Bassil, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We appreciate all your work and your writing on this issue, which which you mentioned, but us as avid football fans, just to try to follow that journey. If it weren't for people like you kind of writing about it and getting in depth into it, honestly, it'd be very difficult for even people like us who are very interested to know where to go, who to follow up with, and what to see beyond like just scores and things like that. So thanks for all the work that you do, and I hope you're able to kind of keep it up, and that more people kind of join you in pushing the story of the Palestine football team, and including the women's team as it kind of goes from strength to strength. So thank you very much, Bassil. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's obviously a responsibility. It's a source of great passion for me. Listen, if you want to follow Palestinian football, footballpalestine.com. I'm also on Substack, so you can subscribe to me on Substack and then get all the news straight to your inbox. Every time there's a match, I also send streaming links, so good way to keep in touch with the national team. And we're also running a contest for our subscribers, giving away a Palestine jersey. So if you can, make sure to subscribe. Free or paid doesn't make a difference for me. If you can get a paid subscription, great. If you can just sign up for free, also honored to have that support as well.
Thank you, Bassil. Thank you.
Okay, guys, I think that was a very interesting discussion, a little bit different than what we've been talking about covering this last few months, and even potentially ending on a possible positive note. What did you guys think of this?
I thought it was an excellent. I thought it was a great interview. I think Bassil, really brings in sort of insights that complement and obviously reflect the Palestinian situation, from the genocide in Gaza to the fragmentation of the Palestinian football scene, to the control of the PA over the Palestinian Football Federation. At the same time, the extraordinary resilience of these Palestinian players and the teams, and the community around the world, the diaspora, and as you said, it's in one sense depressing as always, but in another sense optimistic, hopefully, in the sense that Palestinians still prove that they're there and they're going to continue playing and be defiant in that sense. And so in that, I think that was amazing. Also, the whole question about the European, the really interesting, Sadie, I don't know what you thought about this, but this whole question of the what we feel as the extraordinary hypocrisy in the West of, on the one hand, instantly banning Russia, on the other hand, constantly tolerating Israel and allowing Israel, even in the midst of the genocide, to continue playing football constantly as if there's no genocide going on, and as if everyone doesn't know what's going on. But it's extraordinary. But as he pointed out, football is not the game that it was decades ago. It's now entirely corporatized, and hence we see the results. Sadi, your thoughts?
I mean, just first of all, in general, I thought the great thing about this episode with Bassil was that it reminds us the extent to which as I've said in other contexts, the occupation of Palestine takes place mostly at the level of the everyday, and this everydayness of the Palestinian struggle permeates all aspects of Palestinian life. And obviously, we talk about politics mostly on this podcast and culture and so forth, but football is part of everyday life in that sense too. So you see the Palestinian struggle at this this everyday, what would in other places be a banal aspect of everyday life, for Palestinians becomes much more charged, with footballers being killed and stadiums being blown up and disruptions like that taking place, and obviously in the context of the genocide and so forth happening in Gaza as well. So I thought that aspect of it was fascinating. On the question of, all of us share this frustration with Bassil too, that, Russia invades Ukraine 5 days later or whatever it was, boom, instantly, there's no pushback, there's no wringing hands about Russophobia or whatever. It's instantly, they're banned from everything. Whereas these guys, not just the genocide, but the previous 75 years of dispossession and apartheid and punishment and home demolition and torture, and the whole, we all know the dossier. Nothing, and then now, of course, as usual, we're up against It's the Europeans all over again. Basically, the Europeans and their buddies. Yes, it's Infantino and FIFA. Who is Infantino but a European? And it's again the usual European prevarications about maybe we shouldn't, can we, won't we, and shouldn't we, will we, and like this. Just running in parallel to this discussion about suspending that state from FIFA or sport in general. As we all know, in fact, we talked about this in our last podcast, there was supposed to be this new conference about Palestine coming up, and the Europeans had been hemming and hawing and clearing their throat. Now they're going to recognize the Palestinian state at this conference to mobilize, so forth. And now, of course, meanwhile, they've all backtracked, and now they're going to talk about having a conference about one day, forming a committee to discuss the possibility of eventually having an international liaison to talk about the possibility of perhaps, etc. Right? And so it's the same thing. Why should any of us be surprised that the same thing, the same kinds of prevarications happened at the level of FIFA? I don't know. I think it seems like to me, if there's any kind of hope, it's at the grassroots level. But again, as Bassil was pointing out, in football, as with so much of everyday life, like look at our university campuses too, where administrations have detached themselves from the day-to-day function of the university. This is our bread and butter, basically, right? We know how this works.
And the difference is that AI can't play football yet. So
no, but AI can't do what we do. Somehow AI can't do what we do either. But the point is, there's a kind of as we were saying the other day in a separate conversation, there's a kind of administrative nomenclatura that's formed that's detached from where everybody else in the business is, right? In our case, it's academia. In the case of football, it's the players, the fans, everything else. The admins they live in a separate world, basically. And it's in the world of football, it's the corporate thing and the money and the corruption and FIFA and all this other kind of stuff.
But they're also responsive. I mean, the corporate things are also ultimately going to be responsive to
in
how
the long
people
run.
React.
Yes. I think in the long run like with all this other stuff, I think there's hope because, if you have 65% of whatever it is of Germans now, against the genocidal state, I mean, that's for Germany, that's a lot. And other countries, it's a much higher proportion too. I think in the long run, there's hope. It's just in the short run. In the short run, I guess we have Palestine versus Oman. I don't know, Karim, what do you think?
Exactly. We have Palestine versus Oman. Karim, what do you think?
No, obviously I agree with you guys. I think on the one hand, it was interesting when Bassil was talking about, for example, the leagues, mini leagues in a sense, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and that even that the Israelis kind of put an end to it pre-2019. So the idea of that you could fragment the West Bank and Gaza, as I was saying, in this everyday way, on the kind of it just in terms of football, is pretty extraordinary. The kind of the battles that have to be done just to get a football team, just to get these football players to join together, to train together, to play against a team in an official FIFA World Cup qualifying. All these things which should be normal, regular things, you don't even think about it, is this massive problem, massive issue. Brings the occupation, brings the genocide, it brings the siege, it brings all this global issue, it brings everything into play. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, as you're saying, the discussion of FIFA and this massive corruption of FIFA and the kind of focus of a lot of these Western journalists on, for example, what happened in Qatar, the Qatar World Cup, and now the signing to the Saudi Arabia, among others. So the focus again is this Arabs, whereas it's okay for the huge companies to own a lot of football clubs, and then they say, well, it's a state. Qatar is a state, Saudi Arabia is a state. So when they own Manchester City or if they own PSG, it's different than a massive company. I'm not sure why it's different, but there was not much focus when the first of these guys was Abramovich, who bought Chelsea Football Club, and he was a Russian Israeli who basically fleeced the Russian state and used Russian resources, became a multi-billionaire, and bought Chelsea and changed the very way in which British and world football was run. And it was a totally different way.
Do you remember with him, they kept calling him an oligarch, as if the American billionaires are not referred to as billionaires, as oligarchs.
Oligarch.
It's always, they're the oligarchs. They're the
But he
oligarchs, and
became
that's
a nice
terrible.
guy.
But I
He
know, that's
became
what I'm
this guy
saying.
who smiles in the background and was not critiqued. He was not
No,
critiqued.
but
He
what I'm
wasn't
saying,
attacked.
No, we're agreeing. No, we're
I'm
agreeing
agreeing with
you,
your
Gordon.
point. I'm
Yeah,
agreeing with your
yeah.
point that he
Yeah.
was an oligarch, as opposed to all the other ones who are just somehow better billionaires in that sense. And then also the business of the Qatari and the Saudi and Emirati money is that the argument is that those are states with unlimited budgets that can do whatever they want, as opposed to billionaires who allegedly have some kind of,
With effectively
whatever.
unlimited budgets. I mean, in effect,
Yeah, no,
that's the
I
other
agree.
thing.
I mean,
But
the
also
point is,
some of it.
it's
There's
kind
also,
of,
sorry, it's not just about the money, the level of the money per se. It's also, that's dirty money, as
yeah, of
opposed
course.
to
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
good money of the Walmart
No,
That's what it
bear who
is.
owns
It's the
Arsenal
sports
and so
washing
No,
on.
argument.
100%.
It's all
Yeah.
exactly all money is dirty money, especially at the level we're talking about when it comes to billions. They're all billionaires are somehow there's dirt if you want to. I mean,
But I
the
think,
exploitation
sorry,
of labor. At
But
a
I
bare
guess
minimum, right?
the question, I guess for us, the three of us, I mean, this is a separate topic from what Bassil was talking about. But would we be more incensed? Would we be less, I should say, less incensed by the hypocrisy and the racism and the outrage if the fixation on so-called on sports washing wasn't just focused on these things and focused on,
Arab countries.
yeah, exactly, and they focus on others as well. I mean, or
No,
if they actually took a
I'd
very
still be
strong stand on
outraged.
Palestine, if these journalists took a strong stand on the genocide and talked about sports washing,
Yeah,
somehow
it's the
you'd say, okay,
consistency.
that would, yeah, exactly. As opposed to what they do is they consistently talk about this one issue and then they hem and haw, if not actively deny, when it comes to. I mean, there are a few journalists who've said a few words, but
I
that's
think,
where we
Sam, I
are.
think you're right. I think you're right that it would be the last person here to be defending Manchester City and the UAE ownership of Manchester City
No,
or
I'm not.
any of
I'm
this
not going to defend
other.
them. I'm sorry. I'm not. I won't defend them, no matter what.
No,
But
that's what I'm
anyway,
saying. I am the
yeah.
last person to defend them. And we should have a lot of reservations and critique the way in which football in general has gone in terms of ownership, in terms of money. But as you're saying, it's the consistency. So just to focus on that and not to focus on the others becomes problematic.
It's not just the consistency; it's also the self-righteousness with which they speak about this, as if, like the WalMarts and the billionaires from the U.S. are somehow okay. That's okay. That's just the
Or
way.
as if
Even
they're
though,
not sports washing too, which
yeah, exactly. As if, and as if there wasn't outrage at the time. Do you remember there was a huge amount of outrage when the Arsenal, since we're all Arsenal fans here, when Arsenal went into, didn't they go from, Kenny, you know this more than us, like when it went into simply the exclusive ownership of KSE.
Yeah, of course. So half the teams in England now, the Premier League, are owned by American billionaires, basically, or corporations, and that's probably going to increase. And in any case, I think
It's hard
just to
to
kind of,
imagine. Yeah.
I think to end this discussion here, I think it was really interesting, and I think we need to keep as I said, as you're saying, this kind of everyday politics, this everyday life, of which football is a very important one for us anyway on this podcast, and for many people across the world who follow football. And I think it's for everybody. And let's hope that Palestine wins or beats Oman tomorrow, and somehow manages to get to that last qualifying round. And if not, then let's hope that the civil society, that mobilization from below continues, and let's sort of end on a hopeful note for once.
Yes,
Okay.
and boycott now.
All right.
Okay.
All
Yes.
right. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys.
Bye.